I think it's great. I mean, it's always got a great message. So, here we are.
Go. Does this mean we're live? It probably does.
Yes.
Hello, Sara.
Yes.
Hey, everybody. Hey everybody, Matt Colby here. Welcome to the show. I think you folks, by now you should know how this goes. This is Arcadia number 7 live chat. It's amazing we still get to do this. And I am going to perform my normal function where I just hang out quietly in chat and I read you folks' questions. Hopefully you've had a chance to look over Arcadia 7. And so I will be collating all your questions for our authors while James does his interview magic. James, take it away.
Yes, excellent. I am super excited to be here, and I need to geek out for a moment because this is the first time I have had a face-to-face, digital or otherwise, conversation with Sara. So, big fan of your work. Thank you so much for being here, Sara. It is awesome to have you here. We're going to dive into your article. But before we do that, can you tell the people out there who you are, how you got started in role-playing games and doing cool nerd stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sara. On Twitter, I'm known as Mustang's Art. I made the Combat Wheelchair 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, which is a homebrew item that has appeared on shows like Rivals of Waterdeep and I also have a character in Idle Champions of the Forgotten Realms, which is Talon Uren, and I also work for Aethelfaer Games, the official Witcher tabletop role-playing game, which is a lot of fun, and recently got my first publication with them, so hooray, that came out yesterday. And I got into role-playing games a couple of years ago. Funnily enough, it was 4th edition D&D, which my thoughts on that edition of D&D aside, it was not a great experience. It was a bad group, really, on my end, and I was like, I never tabletop again. I really didn't like it. And then a partner I had just before I went to university was like, you should try it again. Try 5th edition. It's easier to pick up, and you might find people that you like now and want to play it with. And so we tried it again, went to university, and pretty much all I did outside of my lessons was play tabletop games. So, it really kind of kicked off the whole, really getting into it. And then I was like, I want to make my own stuff, and started with making stuff for games that I dungeon mastered for, and then ended up moving into content that I now release online.
Yes, and it's incredible. You've been putting out stuff kind of non-stop for a long time now. Combat Wheelchair, certainly. Congratulations on your publication yesterday from Aethelfaer. That is awesome. And of course, now you've also joined us for Arcadia 7 as one of our authors. I'm wondering if you could pitch people out there on your article. Tell them what it's all about. What did you write about for us in Arcadia 7?
Okay, so I wrote Aethelfaer, who is a ranger. He is kind of a guardian / sentinel, I guess, of forests and the ancestors, his kind of lands, and super big on protecting them and anything that he deems like an endangered species and such. And even though he is a good aligned character, we kind of went with a fun twist that he can still end up as an antagonist. If they disrespect the forest in any way or insult, nature in any way while they're there, he can very easily turn on them. Besides just being an ally, and yes, some people actually didn't notice in the initial artwork. They thought his arm was armored, but actually his right arm and his leg are prosthetics. And there's a whole section that we cover on disability, and we include about sign languages in the article as well. And it was really fun. I had a lot of fun with it. And from hearing some of the community, they also had a lot of fun with him as well.
Yes, I think that there's everybody who looks at him says that he is a badass, right? And I think they like that he has this like no nonsense attitude about his beliefs in the forest and in protecting endangered species, and what he views as his woad and his forest. And I'm wondering, where did that come from? Are you a nature lover yourself, or is that a thing that you admire, are worried about right now, perhaps? Where did that come from, the love of nature?
Kind of from a young age. We did a lot of whenever we go on holiday, it was mainly within where I lived, so like in the United Kingdom. We went to a lot of places where there were a lot of wooded areas, or we'd go down to the coast, and before I needed my wheelchair and my crutches, I could walk longer distances, so we'd do things like trekking for like a family day out kind of thing, and exploring the kind of countryside. And I've always really enjoyed doing things with the National Trust, which is protection of old lands and old houses in the UK. So any kind of like old fancy houses that you tend to see in like UK dramas, they tend to be houses owned by the National Trust, and they're protected, and everything. So like, visiting those, and that definitely had a lot of influence into Aethelfaer and like his determination to try and protect these lands. And as well, I also kind of borrowed elements, funnily enough, from The Witcher, because I really like that kind of gray morality. Nothing is black and white. So, for example, one of the hooks that we had for him, which is him trying to shoot and fend off people who are, ex-soldiers and are taking refuge in the forest, and the fact that they're trying to do it to feed their families, but they don't realize that the animals they're trying to hunt are endangered. So who really has the right of it in this? So getting to have that kind of grey morality that I really enjoy writing, with my experience in writing for The Witcher, getting to add that in a character that can be used in a D&D game or campaign is a lot of fun.
Yeah, you really love The Witcher. I know this because I follow you. I know that you write for The Witcher and everything. So I was going to ask you, were there any Witcher influences in this article? And it sounds like there definitely were, as well as, love of nature. And like, there are some cool tools that Aethelfaer uses, right? He's got within his prosthetics, he has poison that he can like dip his arrows into, sort of hidden in the compartment of his wrist, and his prosthetic foot is like a hoof that can be used to better climb and move faster and things like that. So where did you get these ideas for, prosthetics that have these extra things that allow him to do more than, he'd normally be able to do with like a prosthetic that didn't have a deer foot or a hidden compartment in it?
Well, his foot, for example, was based on sports prosthetics that have the kind of blade, the hoof-like blade, that enable you to run faster and have better grip. And you see a lot of, especially with the Paralympians at the moment, you'll see a lot of Paralympians who are amputees use them. And yeah, it's really impressive, the kind of speed and agility that they have with these prosthetics. So I was like, okay, how can I make this fit the theme of, nature and everything? And I was like, okay, then like a kind of hoof design. And I based it on a mix of deer, because obviously deer run really, really fast, but also a mix of mountain goats and how they are able to climb and find footholds in pretty much any kind of surface seems like flat to climb. It's really impressive. So getting to incorporate that, and then with the arm prosthetic, it's kind of a version of something that I'm currently working on that's going to be in with the combat wheelchair at a later date, and also something that I did with the Witcher tabletop in the free supplement that I released, which is Medicine on the Path, which is all about prosthetics and things. And a couple of the Witcher prosthetics have upgrades where they have compartments and they can hide their coin because they're likely to get it stolen, or they can hide their potions in there. And I was like, okay, if I take that element of potions and then turn it into a poison, because he lives in nature and he of course would know a lot about the horticulture, like flowers and things like that, and have it be a paste. So instead of having this clunky kind of jar that rolled, it's like a strip within the wrist, and then he slides it back and kind of wipes it across rather than having to fumble around with like a load of components in order to make the arrows poisoned. So yeah, getting to kind of mix the ideas that I've had from other things and bring it into this character was a lot of fun.
One of the things that we do to peel back the curtain a little bit for the audience is that when you are writing an article for Arcadia, we ask you, do you have any ideas for art? And particular when you're doing something that is focused around one particular character or item or monster or whatever it may be, we want to picture that thing, right? We want that thing to be pictured. And what was great is, so I wrote to you asking, what do you have ideas for art? And I got back not just a great description, but then a lot of reference from you about this is how I envision different parts of his outfit, and this is how I envision different weapons that he might have, and that kind of thing. And then we took all of that and we gave it to Grace Chung, who is our staff artist here at MCDM. So my question would be is, how did we do? As far as, and I know that's a bit of a loaded question to ask, but
it's okay to be
because
critical.
You and I have emailed about this that I know the answer is safe. Were you happy with the images?
No, I definitely was. Because with sending a lot of references over, I believe I did also send a lot of or images of certain characters and concept sketches that I found that were technically like characters from The Witcher when I suggested them, because Aethelfaer to me had that really kind of Scoia'tael vibe, which in The Witcher are like the rebel elves who live in the forest and they really want to protect their homeland. So like that really kind of fit for me, and Aethelfaer. So getting to see how I kind of really envisioned him, like even down to like the small details of like he has that raven tattoo on his left arm because he really likes ravens, and seeing the interpretation of building in armor into the prosthetic as well was really cool for the arm prosthetic, and having it be in a way that wasn't it wasn't going to catch basically like on the bowstring or anything. It was all like practical and yet super effective. And also like seeing the hoof prosthetic as well, because I wasn't sure how that was going to come out. I was like, I don't know how that's going to kind of portray or go over very well in the artwork. And it came out amazing. And I think like the posing as well was like really natural in a way that like it showed off the prosthetics in like a kind of natural way. It didn't seem like an awkward or a stiff pose.
So one thing we need to talk about is the name. I think one question that I have gotten a lot from playtesters, and then when the article came out, is where did the name come from? And I realized, I don't know. You came up with the name. So where did the name come from?
So Aethelfaer is like an old English name, like really old, like Bronze Age kind of name, and like the kind of time with just as the Vikings were invading, and it is basically an old name that usually the prince who was like next in line to get the crown, so like a crown prince, and they would get the name Aethelfaer. It usually meant things like defender of the realm, that kind of thing. So with Aethelfaer himself being, you know, a defender of the woodland, and kind of himself as like having that responsibility in the way that, like, you know, maybe a kind of like noble, righteous king would. I was like, Aethelfaer has to like really come into it. There was it actually was like kind of from the start, because I was debating with do I make this character male or female, or, you know, non-binary, and the two names that I came down to were Aethelfaer for like a crown prince, or Aethelfled, which would be the crown princess. So either way, that was definitely something that I wanted to put into it, like from the get-go. And for anyone interested, you can kind of research. There were a lot of Aethelfaers and Aethelfleds in basically the kingdom of West Sussex and Wessex at the time. It's like an old kind of Saxon name.
Those old names are better.
Yeah.
Now modern
Yeah,
British
they
people
are.
have names like Matt O'Driscoll, which is awful.
they really work well for elves. I found, though, like I've named a lot of elves in things.
I completely agree.
Like old Saxon names.
By the way, folks watching, I'm a big proponent of this. There's a great PDF I think you can buy on Drive-Thru RPG, and it's called Gary Gygax's Book of Names, Extraordinary Book of Names. Literally just a big book of names. Very, very well researched. And it has tons of old Anglo-Saxon, old Saxonic names, Brittonic names. It's super, super cool. So if you like the name Ethelred the Unready. If you like the name Aethelfaer, you should go check it out, because there's a ton of names like that in there. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
No,
yeah,
I think that's
saying, like,
great.
yeah, you know, like a kind of, yeah, with the Saxon names.
Yeah. So what do you think is the ideal way that you would use Aethelfaer in your game if you were to use this NPC? Oh yes, and the cat has made an appearance.
I would potentially use them quite interestingly, like with some parties that I have currently, where a lot of the stuff has taken place in cities and like big towns, so they're very used to the kind of urban setting and urbanized like ideals, where like you don't think so much about nature. It would be a great way for them to have that kind of confrontation with a culture that's completely different from their own. And if you've also got a ranger who is like of a different archetype, would just be really interesting, because you have Aethelfaer, who's like this very like kind of traditional ranger, in the sense of very connected to nature, almost on a level that like a druid would be. So like having another ranger who potentially is, for example, like a monster slayer ranger, and is used to going from place to place fighting monsters, being kind of introduced to this ranger who has a completely different skill set, and potentially them learning things from each other would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think there's so much opportunity, especially with could start as a frenemy and become a friend, or go the other way. I think there's a lot of great opportunity there. I think one thing that I could always use is an NPC who acts as a check on characters who might be jerks sometimes, So it's always good to have that NPC. So Matt, what is chat saying? Do they have any questions for Sara?
Well, yeah. There were some good questions in here, but I also have some questions. What did we talk about? What are you working on for our Taslorian games? Because those folks have been around forever, and it really delighted me to hear their name come up.
So I've worked a bit on Cyberpunk Red for them. I did the new Cyberchaz, and establishing a canon team within Night City that plays Murder Ball. So getting to
Cool.
talk about that,
Awesome.
and add that into the setting. And I also played a character for them on stream called Nyx Phosphate, who has become like canon now within Cyberpunk Red, and
That's great.
they
And so
have artwork now and everything.
Is that stream
and,
archived online? Can people
Yes.
watch you playing? That's awesome.
Yeah, you can go to Sirenscape's YouTube, because they
okay, fair enough.
produced a
Yep, I
whole
know
like
that.
cyberpunk. Yeah,
Yep.
they produced a whole cyberpunk kind of soundtrack to go with games. And I am currently working on The Witcher with them. I recently just got published with my first adventure, which was in Book of Tales, which is a collection of 6 official adventures, and you can either kind of drop them in your own games, or you can actually use them all together in like a long campaign. It takes you all the way from the north of the continent all the way down to the south, and you know, in the background you kind of have the war between Nilfgaard and the north and how that's affecting everything. And then I have my second adventure. I've written the starring only adventure for the upcoming Tome of Chaos, which is going to be a book all about magic. That has been announced. I'm allowed to say that one.
So that means that implies there are things you've worked on that are not announced that you cannot talk about.
Yeah,
we want to hear about those. No, I'm kidding.
I've got one that currently 2 things that I'm currently working on. One that is more like a thing that will come out as and when, and another one which is another book to go with the core kind of books and establishes more about the world of The Witcher, as vague as I can say it. But yes, that's been
awesome. That is super
really
cool.
exciting.
What was your first like published thing that you did, either on your own independently or for somebody else? Do you remember?
On my own, on my own, it was the combat wheelchair last year, last August.
So this has all happened to you in a year.
That's amazing. A few months before.
Well, it's all downhill from here. No, okay.
About a month or so, posted the combat wheelchair. Aethelfaer picked me up because I applied for a job offering, and I had to basically write an adventure for them. They were like, oh, it only has to be like 3 or 4 pages. I turned in a 12-page adventure and got like super enthusiastic and provided a dictionary and translations of the Elder Speech in The Witcher as well that players could use and things in it. I've since released that online for free for people to use if they want to. And yeah, they were really kind, and they were like, yeah, like, you know, we'll give it a shot. Wrote the one adventure, and they've kept coming back and hiring me. So
that is really, really inspiring. I hope folks in chat and people watching this video on demand take a lesson from that. That is super cool. So, are you a huge fan of The Witcher? Is this like a dream come true for you? Yeah.
Huge fan. Yeah.
That's awesome.
From everything. Novels to video games to the TV show. I absolutely love it.
This is gonna sound strange, but that reminds me, it's not entirely unlike how I got started in the industry in the 90s, where my first gig was working on the Dune collectible card game, and I was as happy as a pig in shit, as they say. I was so crazy over the top delighted, and so it's super cool, especially when you're starting out, to get to work on these properties that you love. I'm also really impressed that you stuck, even though you played 4th edition, which is almost universally hated. I'm happy to carry the flag of I loved it, but in spite of the fact that you had a bad group, you came back around and you gave it another shot. And if you hadn't done that, who knows like how different things would have been. What made you decide, okay, screw it, I'll give it another shot? Maybe it was just those people were wankers.
I mean, yeah, it was kind of a mix of that and the kind of friend group and everything that I built up at the time. And my partner was like, look, I'll play a one shot, I'll DM it, you know, you can play by yourself. In kind of like a safe kind of environment, so you can ask questions and things and not feel awkward or bad about having to ask them. So I did that, and I really, really enjoyed it. And they were like, okay, I'll introduce like 1 or 2 of my friends in that I trust as being pretty good role players, and you know, not being too picky about the game and everything. So they came in, and I had a great time with them. We played Curse of Strahd, like all the way through before university, and like our games would go on for it sounds strange, but our games would go on for about 9 hours. Like we just super got into it.
I was a young person once.
Yeah. we just got really into it, and then we had the pressure of like universities coming up, and like all of us were going different ways. So we were like, okay, we got to finish the campaign. Like we'll just do 10 hours tonight. And, you know, it kind of it was a great campaign, and
my
it really
first
got me
ever
back
dungeon
into it.
master got kicked out of a very expensive university because we were all still in high school, and he was like a year or two ahead of us, and we would say, "Hey, run D&D for us," and he would go, "Okay." And he would just he instead of not doing his homework and not turning in assignments, and
oh no.
So I think it's super cool that you stuck with it. Mr. Fizzer was the first person of many to ask how you came up with the name Aethelfaer, but you already answered that. My question is this a character? I asked this of I think most of our authors. Is this a character that you invented for Arcadia, or was this somebody that you had in your pocket already?
This was one that I invented for Arcadia. It was an idea that I kind of had been toying around with for a while. I was like, I really want to make like an interesting ranger, and like have, really delve into the whole tie between rangers and nature, because I feel like in 5e that doesn't get brought up enough in like materials and things. The same way that like, a druid kind of does. So yeah, getting to delve more into that, and I was also kind of on a Lord of the Rings kick at the time, and I was like, yeah, like Aragorn, like being really tied to the land, and yeah, like it all kind of just culminated together to make Aethelfaer.
Well, it's interesting because I think almost all the authors say that their content is something they invented for Arcadia, and I think that's interesting. I don't know if lesson is the right word, but I think that's an interesting data point for the people watching, is that this is not just homebrew stuff that these people had in the background. This is stuff that was, professionally and originally created for publication. I think that is super cool. We had a whole bunch of comments from folks like James Warner saying that they love how much they love the design of the prosthetics. I was very impressed as a writer and a designer with the fact that you included rules for what if you don't got an arm, and what if you don't got a leg, right? What if you're not wearing your prosthetics? Because I am super old school, and when I came up, it was very popular to have RPGs where when you built your character, they weren't necessarily class based, but you could buy like advantages, but you could counter the cost of the advantages with disadvantages. And one of the things you learned was players, if you give them the chance, players will take quote unquote disadvantages, which can include disabilities, but they don't want to have to actually deal with it. They don't want to have to, they just want to get the points for it. They don't want to actually have to deal with the fact that, they may be missing an eye, or they may have been born with only, one arm. And so that was a big part of being a dungeon master in those games, was you got to make sure that if you're going to do it, you actually do it, and you deal with it and you take it seriously. And so Aethelfaer is not just, universally improved by the fact that he's missing one arm and a leg. There's sometimes, if you catch him unawares, like there have to be times when he takes his prosthetics off, and if you catch him unawares, there's going to be an issue, which to me is awesome because that creates drama, and that is our job as dungeon masters. So this was a question from the Discord, which I am also active in the Discord, and Aethelfaer was super popular with the folks in our chat. And somebody asked what I thought was a good question. How does this dude's arm work? Is this magic or technology?
It's kind of a mix of both is what I went with. So it's technology in the terms of the article explains it like how he wears a proper socks, quote unquote, over the stumps, how he has to use talc to make sure that he doesn't get chafing and things like that, and the fact that it's attached to his body, not just with the cup but also with belts, to ensure that if it gets knocked, it's not going to come straight up.
Also, in order to get that articulation, typically it has to be really, really like very. These prosthetics have to be very tightly, adapted to the body.
Yeah. So I kind of played with kind of almost Star Wars, I guess you would call it, with in their prosthetics they have these things called neural interfaces, which basically it attaches to the stump itself. It doesn't have to go into the body. It picks up on like electrical stimulation from the brain directing the arm what to do, and because in the article also discusses it as well, how they've gone through kind of the same reinforcement that his bow has gone through, which is a special wood elf kind of treatment that they put the bows and everything through, that they have more resistance, therefore he's able to draw back really hard with the bow to get really clean shots, more than he would if he had a flesh and bone arm. So yeah, getting to think about it in that much detail for me is like a lot of fun. Like, it's why I enjoy making the characters that I make, and it's why I enjoy making the disability content that I make. Like getting to think of new ways of presenting disability in a way that's positive and not just makes sense for the world that they're in, but also it just makes sense for the character, what they're doing, what they need help with, what they wouldn't need from a prosthetic and things like that.
Well, all creative endeavors require constraints, right? You have to define what's your sandbox and what lens are you going to use to look through to see everything. And saying I'm going to work on characters that have a disability, that constraint, it means you're now focusing on the reality of these people's experience, and that's where your ideas spawn from. You're like, well, how would this work? And I thought I detected when you said you were on a Lord of the Rings kick that I was like, yeah, because the answer from the elves would be, is it magic or is it technology? They'd be like, I don't understand the question, right? Like that's the Galadriel answer, right? Where it's like, you folks use that magic term to mean a lot of stuff that we don't think is related. So, whatever, it just works. So yeah, there were, let's see, Brighton said, I just started reading the article. This is how all Rangers should be. I agree. I think that Aethelfaer is really, really cool. How are we doing on time? We just hit 11:30. I liked the question from Resende saying, I would have loved to have seen an illustration with this character at ease without their aids, I think the answer was, why didn't you do that? And I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was probably because we only have so much. Our art schedule only affords so many pieces of art, so we got to pick and choose. And I'm happy with the decisions that we made, but obviously, obviously, if we had room for more art, then we would do something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's why I went that kind of extra length in my writing to describe what Aethelfaer does when he's not wearing his prosthetics. I talked about the fact that he wears these kind of socks, the fact that he goes through a whole ritual almost of making sure he's got talcum powder on before he goes to bed or before he puts them on, and when he does go to bed he doesn't have his prosthetics on. The kind of certain environments he'll only take them off in, and when he does take them off, he has a crutch. He can't have two because obviously one arm is missing from the shoulder down, so he has a left crutch, and because he's kind of used that his entire life, he's very good at being able just to use one crutch to move around. So yeah, getting to talk about that, because that we would have an art constraint and things like that, but it probably definitely won't stop me in the future commissioning a piece of artwork of him potentially because cool. I'm definitely going to use him in a campaign. So I'll definitely get artwork of him done at some point.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I think that would be great. I think folks would love to see that.
Yeah. Sarah, we are going to have to run soon because our next guest is ready. But before we do, tell people about what you're working on and where they can find you. I know you've got a new version of the combat wheelchairs coming out soon, right? Like imminently.
Yeah, like tomorrow. Yeah. Combat Wheelchair version 3.0 comes out tomorrow. It'll be on my Twitter, which I'll link the PDF through and everything. It's still 100% free. It comes with the core rule set, an upgrades catalog of every upgrade you can get for it. It has every single subclass, but 14 subclasses total because there is a homebrew entirely new class that I made called the Wafster, which is my love letter to The Witcher, in which you become part monster in order to fight monsters, and depending which school you work or go with depends on the kind of monster that you become. Then there is also Matt Mercer's Blood Hunter, which he very kindly gave me permission to use.
Nice.
And then there is also a short story. There is lots of artwork, and there is a plan for version 3.1 for extra stuff, and there are also 3 NPCs, all of them disabled, with advice on role playing them, and each one has a different disability. So that's all coming out on my Twitter. You can also go to Aethelfaer Games' website or drive through RPG and buy Book of Tales in PDF format, or you can buy it in book format from their website if you want, a nice physical copy. And there are also now a series of Witcher TTRPG official dice, and they're really pretty, and they have like Witcher engravings on, and each one has like the different Witcher signs and different school signs on, which I believe Q Workshop, I think it is working on those, and I think that's everything I can talk about for now. So yeah, basically, if you follow my Twitter, Mustang's Art, whenever I can talk about things, I then post them up there and mainly share it on there. So yeah, be sure to check out for Combat Wheelchair version 3. A few people today are getting the early version, so hopefully they'll have some comments on it for tomorrow. Yeah, that's everything.
That's awesome.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great, and hopefully we will work with you again soon.
That'd be great.
Sure.
I agree.
Thank you.
Sarah, it was great meeting you. Thank you for doing this.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, look
Whoa!
It's
Hannah's here.
Hello. I could have listened to Sara talk all day, though.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why you're here now, to continue the game design brain train that we have going on right now. So Hannah, you've been working on Arcadia since issue 1, and you've already come on one of these chats to talk about editing Arcadia, but now we're reintroducing you to the world as author. So go ahead and tell the people at home who may not know what they should know about you and your meteoric rise in the tabletop role-playing game industry.
Oh, okay. I am Hannah Rose. I guess I started out doing D&D stuff, but almost 4, can I count? 3 or 4 years ago, off by 1 error, it's fine.
Off by 1 error.
I think it was 2019, 3 years ago. And, yeah, I started out just making stuff for fun, and made the College of the Opera, for my friend Kelly, the opera geek, who tweeted about, she wants a bard subclass that is an operatic bard, because that's what she does. And I was like, I'll write this up for her. And then she was like, you have to put this on DM's Guild. And then we put it on DM's Guild, and people were really into it. And I met people through people I know, and started editing for Wizards, and got to work with James on stuff. Yeah, that's right, James, my first editing job for Wizards was a chapter that you wrote for Descent into Avernus.
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah, the Scab was the first thing that you edited.
Yeah, that was fun. It was.
Yeah.
I was very lucky to have your writing be the first thing I edited.
Well, thank you. I remember I got a message from you, I think, that said, like, if I have to read the word pus or scab one more time.
Yes, I was like, man, James, this is great. It's gross.
Yep, super gross.
Yeah, and I've gotten to work with you on a couple other things through the years on DM's Guild. My Dad's Monster Manual. And
that's right.
Yeah. And you asked me if I want to... Well, I'd heard about Arcadia launching, and I was like, this is going to be amazing. This is something the community really needs. I'm really excited for this. I think James is a great person to head it up. Man, wouldn't it be cool if I could work on that? And then I got an email saying, hey, do you want to edit for Arcadia? And I was like, yes, I'm in!
That's gotta feel good. That's cool. That's awesome. I mean, I think we're incredibly lucky to get to work with folks like you. So this is a great, happy mutuality of purpose.
Exactly.
It's fun all
Yeah.
around.
Yeah, we got our first choice for editor, so that is really great for us to be able to work with you on this stuff. And of course, knowing that you also had a lot of design chops, I was eager to work with you as an author, and you wrote Wonders of the Wild. And well, tell people what Wonders of the Wild is all about. Pitch them on the article in case they have not read the latest issue of Arcadia yet.
So, back when I was just starting to get into the D&D space, which I mentioned, I had played a druid for the first time, and I'd really been sleeping on druids. I was like, I don't know about this. I don't really know much about, plants and gardening and stuff. And I played a druid, Circle of the Moon, and I was like, I'm turning into a wolf and a bear, and this is awesome! But we were in a dungeon, and all my other party members were getting this cool loot that worked for their characters, and I was like, I'm turning into a wolf, none of this is useful for me. And I was really sad, because I love magic items that are themed, that fit into my character's story and aesthetic, and if I have a flavor and aesthetic for my character, you bet I am going to go 100% all the way with that. So, yeah, I don't want some dragon scale chainmail for my, celestial themed, ethereal fighter or something. And so I started making some magic items. I was like, well, what would I want if I were playing a druid, which I now love, or a ranger, which is my first D&D character. And I fiddled with this on my own, and then it got set aside in favor of projects that were paying me, instead of projects I was gonna, put money out to illustrate. And when Arcadia started up and I started editing it, I was like, well, maybe this article could find a home here. Or maybe this content could find a home here. I think people would like this, and this is something that I care really deeply about. That's very, personal to me, as someone who loves playing druids and rangers, as someone who wants, I saw a mechanical question in the chat that I will get to later. And someone who, wants cool magic items. Yeah, as someone who wants cool magic items for, the characters. Yeah, whoa, gosh, I lost track of thoughts. I'm just really excited about this. Oh, yes, and the pitch. Because that was the why. Here's the what. The what is magic items and spells for druids, rangers, fae-themed warlocks, paladins, Oath of the Ancients, all of this. Your characters want magic items that are special for them, that have a story, that come from a place, that let them do things that are cool and fun and flavorful. So yeah, this article is full of magic items, and as part of developing it, outside of, outside of any official D&D content, there was a need to come up with a bunch of cool elemental spells. And I really actually enjoy doing that. I don't get to write spells very often, and come up with these spells that it's like, there are a lot of fire spells, right? There aren't a lot of water and ice and wind spells. And some of these magic items that come with spells needed spells that were flavorful for them. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I have learned in doing Arcadia, because of the way Arcadia is structured, and we kind of, we ask the authors, what do you want to write about? We often end up in these places where you had sort of already gotten to with your article beforehand, but sometimes we, through digging, end up there where it's like, this is great, but in order for this to work, we also might need some of this, right? Like, in order for this to be the best version possible of these magic items, we need these other spells, because not only are druids maybe underserved here with magic items, they're underserved with flavorful elemental spells that aren't all fire themed, and so you had already though thought about that. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Or tree and forest themed. That's the thing that this article includes. There's a staff of the woodlands, right? Which is honestly an amazing magic item, especially for its rarity, because it lets you cast Pass Without Trace at will. And it's awesome for this classic woodland forest themed druid. But Circle of the Land Druids, there are how many? 8 other biomes. There's desert, tundra, coast, grasslands, underdark. There's all of this, and I wanted those druids to have staffs that were thematic to them too, and then it needed those spells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you said it right, and then you corrected yourself.
Well, so the reason I said that and made a face is because staves is correct, but the actual D&D word is staffs. In the writing, we use staffs.
Whatever.
I don't know why, but that's what it is.
You just witnessed live copy editing here, and it's it's funny. You brought up something that we were actually talking about with Sara beforehand, right? Which is that like normally people come to us and say, "This is what I would like to write. I haven't written it yet, but like, can we do this?" Whereas this article was a little different because often when people come and say, "Hey, I have." A couple of things lying around in the old shop here," they're usually very, very specific, and they're usually like somebody's homebrew world lore that is maybe not necessarily of general appeal.
I've heard those pitches. I've been working on this world for 13 years, and I want to publish my campaign set, and I'm like, I love it, but...
Yes, yeah, and I had an author come to me and say, "I'd love to pitch a campaign for Arcadia," and I was like, "Oh, we don't, that's not what we do." Like the magazine itself isn't an entire campaign length adventure, so I don't think we would do that, right? But having this and you saying like, "Here's a specific issue that I saw in terms of like." Usability, and I solved it, and I'd like to pitch that. That was like a joy. It was like, yeah, this is perfect. This is exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for here in Arcadia. And I know that people have a lot of questions kind of about the spells and how you came up with them and how you identified these different areas of that, like, hey, we need some more of this. And so that would be my question to you. Like, did you look at the spells and say, we need more spells of this level that are associated with these elements? Like, it was that sort of your process, or was it something, hey, I have these staffs and I need for these staffs, so I'm going to create from there and go from there? Like, what was the way, how did it work?
Yeah, I came up with the magic items first. I came up with the concepts for the magic items, and some of them were like, okay, well, I have the Staff of the Woodlands, and I'm making a Staff of the Desert Sands for a Desert Druid. And, well, I should do all the other biomes, so let's come up with something for each of those. And then some of them, like the Tundra, the kind of ice-themed one, there are some good ice-themed spells, and there needs to be, basing it on the Staff of the Woodlands, there's a certain distribution of spells that are at different levels and are maybe utility versus combat spells. So none of these staves, I'm just going to say staves, we all like that better. None of these staves, I see everybody in the chat making jokes about it. I love it. But none of these staves are all combat spells, because that just makes this item like super mechanically powerful. That's what a Staff of Power is for. Like, these are not intended to be things that you're gonna just blast your enemies with and never need to use your own spell slots. So it's a mix of different levels of spells, and I was like, okay, well, we really want some second level spells, at least one second level spell in here. There isn't really a good one for the theme, or in some cases, well, there is a good one for the theme, but we're not allowed to use or reference that spell. So let's make one that's actually cooler.
So yeah, that's the way to do it.
Hell yeah. So, Hannah, I want to just take a little diversion, because I think the audience, and I think Matt actually will get a kick out of this, because I don't think he knows this, is that a few a few weeks ago, we played a D&D game together where you got to try out the first iteration, and they've been through more iterations since then, but you play tested our companion rules
Yeah,
in
that was so
that
much
game.
fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah. So, the thing that I determined from that is we didn't get really even close to any companions, like going into a feral frenzy. So I've made it easier for that to happen.
Yes,
now.
even without a feral frenzy, I rolled a nat 1 on my animal handling check, so...
It was great. Yeah, but it was so. This was the other thing is, you had come to me and we were talking about having a one shot together because we like to play games together, and you had brought up this idea of like everybody on a mount, and I said like, oh, you know what, that's great because I actually have these companion rules I kind of want to try with these, this mount thing. But it's clear that you have a love of nature and animals and that sort of thing. Your first character was a ranger. You wanted to play a druid, and then you made all this stuff for them. We had you write for our nature issue because of that. Where does that come from in you? Like, what's the appeal of nature and fantasy for you?
I mean, I grew up and I live in the Pacific Northwest where, I am surrounded by beautiful nature, mountains and forests and, the ocean, Puget Sound, but it feels like the ocean near me, and a temperate rainforest just across the sound. And, I think, James, in your letter to the editor, a letter from the editor, in this article, you talked about finding inspiration in nature. And that really rang true to me of going outside makes me feel, going outside makes me feel like, oh yeah, outside, that's great, fresh air, I should do this more. But going outside into nature is like, it's so mentally, emotionally, and creatively refreshing that as creators, we need that creative input when we're trying to do output all the time, and sometimes that comes from movies or games or books or any other media we consume. But I think nature really does that too, because there's so much going on, and there's a story in every tree stump and fallen massive roots and lightning struck tree with ferns growing out of it. They're just all these stories. And it's really pretty in a way that just happens by itself. Yeah, and I love that.
That's great.
And then also, I have a purring cat on my lap right now. I don't think the camera will show her very well, maybe later, but...
Show us the cat! Show us the cat!
I will show the cat at the end of the stream. You'll have to stick around. I'll show the cat at the end of the stream.
That's it, folks. That's the end of the stream. Thanks for watching.
No, because if I pick her up now to show her to you, she will be disturbed, and then she might be yelling for the rest of the show. Yeah. And believe me, you don't actually want to listen to that.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Matt, what is chat asking?
Nothing.
What do they want to know
much
from Hannah? Nothing?
So David Jansen asked a terrible question, but I am going to ask it anyway, out of respect for David. Which of the staves is your favorite? Do you have a favorite? Which of your children do you love the most?
The Staff of the Desert Sands, I think it has to be that one. I reserve the right to change my answer later. But right now it's the Staff of the Desert Sands, because desert is just so opposite of forest, but it's such a cool nature place. It's like full of its own kind of life and its own stories and its own weather. And you really can't use anything woodland themed through a desert, but there were some spells that exist that fit it really well, and there were some spells and things like the sandstorm we turned that into a spell, right? Or did we keep it as a staff
we
ability?
did. Sandstorm
We turned
is
it into
indeed a spell.
Yeah. So originally the Sandstorm spell was that special ability of the staff, because all of the staves have, that unique thing you can do with them. And I just have this image, I almost picked this for art, but I just have this image of this desert druid just planting the staff down in the sand and wind and sand whirling around him. And it's so dynamic. So yeah, I love that one.
This is bad, though, because you make all these dope-ass magic items and spells for other environments, and people are going to read it, and they're going to want to play in those environments. And there is not a lot of support, unfortunately. That's why they can get away with there's a staff of the woodlands and nothing else, because they don't make a lot of like really cool desert adventures or really cool underwater adventures. So yeah, now more people need to make more content.
Some of those.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. This kind of leads to Pesto's question, Pesto the Besto Testo. So I need to ask, where did you get the idea for one spell, Flurry of Icicles, having multiple different areas of effect? He says, I love this idea way too much. I'm not sure that we've seen that before in a D&D spell. I think that's super cool.
We haven't, which I'm glad, Pesto, that you love it so much, and that you and the testers did the testing on it to make us feel confident that we can do that, because James and I went back and forth on that a lot. As someone who edits official content, I can be very picky about when to deviate from existing things, but I was looking at some existing spells, and I wanted something that felt different than just, okay, you're doing some cold damage somehow, or you are, throwing some snowballs and that makes people cold. But I wanted to be really cool, and like icicles are sharp and cool, and why throw one icicle at people? You could throw many. And I also love magic, especially nature magic, being something that you can really channel and customize, I guess, in the moment, Well, if you could summon a flurry of icicles, why shouldn't you be able to do it in different shapes?
Good question.
And yeah, so like I was very nervous about balancing that spell mechanically. But I could envision all of these different shapes. Like, you shoot out the cone of icicles from your hands. You just create the icicles and it falls on people. God, I love nature spells that just summon stuff that falls on people. Yeah. I just wanted it to be cool. That's where all of this comes from.
It is cool. I mean, it is cool. It's super cool. Grenth 91. Wait, hang on. No, we already went over that, I think. Brighton asks the inevitable question. Having edited and now written for Arcadia, did Hannah have to edit herself? Does she have any insight into how self-editing and editing for others is different?
Oh yeah, great insight. Don't self-edit. Absolutely not. I mean, okay, self-edit, please. Edit your own work, learn to revise your own work. Yeah. Step away from your own work and come back. But have somebody else who's a fantastic editor actually make your work good, which in this case was Sadie Lowry. That's right. Sadie is incredible, and I am so grateful on so many levels to have her join me as an editor for Arcadia. And James, I think one of the reasons, other than me being busy with many things, that we wanted to bring another editor on for Arcadia was that we knew my article was coming, and I wasn't going to edit that one. Yeah, and so Sadie came on. God, she did such a good job editing it. There were things where it was like, oh my god, I'm so embarrassed I wrote it that way. How could I have, made that mistake? And then she fixed all that mechanical wording, but she's also really gifted with prose and making things really evocative and flavorful. And she brought that extra sparkle and polish.
Yeah, we are truly spoiled in that we have two people working on Arcadia as editors who edit all day, every day, a lot of the time, or they're writing game content. And often, more than 8 hours a day. So we have some very experienced folks. And I think just a fun fact is that Sadie also lives in the Pacific Northwest, and you two co-work together sometimes?
We co-work virtually. Sadie has lived in the Pacific Northwest, and I would love for her to return to the Pacific Northwest so we can co-work in person. But no, our co-working is online. We have an editor support chat, and it's wonderful.
Pesto asked a question. I feel like you said this, but I don't remember. When you played with one of our companions using James's companion rules, what pet did you run?
James made us Moorbounder companions from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. This game came about because the Wildmount minis by WizKids and Critical Role were released. Sadie, I love you. I love co-working with you. Oh no, somebody deleted her message. Oh no.
Message deleted by Nightbot.
Let's Sadie spam in caps. Anyway.
Lady was timed out by Nightbot. It's getting worse.
Wow. Hey, Sabril. Oh my god, so many questions I want to answer. But the question that James asked, the question that Pesto asked was about, Moorbounders. We were very excited about the mini set, and so naturally some friends and I wanted to play a game that was online, in which we did not actually use minis, but all got to play Paladins mounted on Moorbounders. Yes, Matt?
I don't know what that word is that you're saying. What is it Warbounder?
Sorry, it is Moorbounder, Moor.
Like the Spanish Moor.
I get it.
And
Stay
they
off the
are creatures, they're ginormous, kind of panther-like creatures with tusks.
Nice.
Like somewhere between a panther and a saber-toothed tiger. That exist in the Jorhas region.
Oh, there we go.
In
That's
Eastern
cool.
Wildmount. And I was like, James, please DM this game for me and a bunch of people you've never met, but who are very cool.
That's awesome.
And that was the idea. I was approached with, will you run a game in which we all have a Moorbounder? And I said yes, but you must use these new companion rules. And it worked out really great. It was a very chaotic. It turns out that was the game actually, Matt, where I learned maybe you only want one companion per party, and not everybody has a companion.
We were all incredibly unoptimized as characters. Like, this was the kind of game where we knew it was going to be a one-shot, and so keep in mind, we were all paladins with Moorbounders, like trained mounts.
That sounds
and
awesome.
There was one person who had a non-negative animal handling score.
Nice.
I rolled the worst stats I've ever rolled and was
why do these why do we have these pets? Maybe the pets have us. Maybe it's the pets that have human handling skills.
One of them was a tabaxi, and her Moorbounder treated her like a cub.
Makes sense to me. John Champion, aka Lord Durok, the king of the mods, says, did Hannah anticipate the extensive debate of, does Tremor Sense let you see as far as rules are concerned?
Does Tremor Sense let you see as far as rules are concerned? I mean, surely Jeremy Crawford has said something on Sage Advice. So I'm just going to go with whatever.
What was the debate?
No, I did
John?
not anticipate it.
So this is something you included in the spell that says this sense can be used to detect flying or incorporeal creatures or see invisible ones, though. This spell, I'm sorry, cannot be used to detect flying or incorporeal or see invisible ones, though it can pinpoint the location of an invisible creature moving on or through the earth.
Makes sense.
Which I think is must have been pulled from an official Jeremy Crawford tweet, because I don't think tremor sense has been defined that specifically. And that's why.
I don't remember doing that part. Maybe you and Sadie did that part? I don't.
Oh, maybe.
That may be. So I will say that there is a behind the scenes that before this article came out, it was Sam's article about spells in Arcadia 4, Alabaster's Almanac. There was something that gave you tremor sense. Yes, and one of our contract testers, Guardian, and I did a deep dive into does tremor sense let you see invisible creatures? That did end up with me reaching out to a member of the WotC team to be like, okay, we need help. So yes,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I agree with that. It's always kind of like common sense for me,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say tremor sense, if you have that ability, sure, you can see as long as a creature is in contact with the earth or something you can touch and feel those tremors.
Right, yeah. So
we got a bunch of comment. Oh, sorry, we are now at 12:04. I realize.
Oh no, go ahead.
No,
go
but
ahead,
I want
Matt.
to keep talking.
We got a lot of comments like Christian Belleville saying, "I love the article. I'm going to use all of it. I've got players that are really excited to use the spells and find the items." We got a lot of those. We got rule mechanic questions from Jonathan Gant. Bag of saplings commanding how the awakened tree uses its actions. Is it specifically verbal, somatic, telepathic? How do you communicate with your awakened tree? How do you tell it what to do?
It is ambiguous, like many other similar items where you command are ambiguous. I'd probably, as a DM, I'd probably go verbal, but I also am not gonna mandate, oh, the tree, can't hear you, or doesn't speak your language, or whatever. It's however you want it to be.
It got no ears. It ain't got no ears. Sorry. It could have ears. It's an awakened plant. Yeah. Kelly has a question. The crown that gives special wild shapes is such a great idea. Love giving that kind of stuff as treasure. Did you have any other themes for crowns that didn't make the cut?
Ooh,
Look at that. Look at that dope ass Justin Sherry art.
Yeah. This is so gorgeous. I love the crown design. I was basically figure out a cool crown design. Oh god, I have to go back in my very old original drafts. I don't think I had any other crowns. The Halo of the Heavens was, it's a halo. It has to do that. And I wanted other options for wild shape that are turning into things. Some people don't like wild shape because it is in some ways very limited and it's better at certain levels than others, and it kind of falls off in terms of utility. And so I was and I have a druid who's a gardener, so I was I want to turn into plants, and also I have this really pretty Pegasus mini that I've never gotten to use. And yeah, so I wanted those that are wild shape, but a little broader, a little more options.
Makes sense.
But I don't think I have any other crowns. Happy to take suggestions, though.
I think it's a cool idea. I think there should. I love the idea of there being a set of canonical crowns.
No, there was going to be not a crown. There was going to be a belt of oozes or something of oozes as well as something of vines. I think we had a limited number, of items that and I wanted to focus on the the most universally applicable ones.
Is that the name of the item?
It might have just been Belt of Oozes so far. I mean, maybe if I developed it, it would have had a... Yeah.
I want to know. I want to know what it's called. The Belt of Strike
Aethelfaer.
Dota the Aethelfaer. So has a question about the Cloak of the Grove Guardian. Always under the effects of a speak with animal spell. How does that interact with Dispel Magic? Can Dispel Magic dispel the effect? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, the rules for Dispel Magic on items are, I think, laid out in Dispel Magic.
Yeah.
If you target the item specifically, you might be able to...
You suppress it, right.
You could suppress that for a time.
Classic.
Boom. Don't bring a question to an editor fight or something.
Yeah.
This Hannah, this has been great. We have one more interview that we are going to roll in, but before we do that, I think you should tell people like what you've been working on, where they can find you, and I think it's funny. At the time, I wasn't 100% sure, but now I also know why you wanted to run a Moorbounder game, which might be fun to tell people, given recent announcements in your storied career.
Oh no, I just put a capital thing in chat. Okay.
Oh God,
I didn't
no.
get banned. Yeah, so I this year have been working on the Tal'Dorei campaign setting Reborn, with Critical Role and Darrington Press. And actually I got to put a magic item in there that I adapted from something I did not put in this article. So there are a few nature-themed magic items in there.
Great.
The Ashari enclaves in Tal'Dorei. I'm telling this all backwards, and I'm probably not even supposed to give too much detail. There are some elemental-themed magic items in the new magic items in the Tal'Dorei campaign setting, which is a revised, updated, and expanded version of the Critical Role Tal'Dorei campaign setting published in 2017. Everything's been edited and revised and updated, the timeline 25 years later, and the page count has been doubled. There are 100 new pieces of art. It was this massive undertaking that was so much work and so much fun, and I am incredibly honored to be a lead designer and managing editor and art director on that.
Nice.
Yeah, so keep an eye on Critical Role and Darrington Press for when the release date of that will be. And in the meantime, I'm working on other NDA things, and I have promised to show you a cat. Let me...
Cat.
Hi, Mimi.
Cat.
Let me finagle this. Okay, I'm gonna
Show
put my
us
tea
the cat.
aside. Well, I'm sitting at a lap desk, which is why she's in my lap under the lap desk.
Whoa.
Come here. Come here, sweetie. Let all the people see you.
Oh, look at that! A calico kitty. Hello,
Yeah.
hello, little kitty. Meow. Hello, I want to scratch your little face. What a beautiful cat.
Say hi to everybody.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
she is
She
very
knows.
pretty, and she knows it.
Awesome.
What is the cat's
What a-
name?
Oh, this is May. M-E-I.
May.
Yeah, I know. May. And okay, there she goes. It's like,
Okay,
why
bye.
did you interrupt my nap? Thank
Okay,
you
bye.
so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for
Yes.
joining us.
Want to watch Friends in the Future. And
Yeah.
folks whose questions I did not get to answer, please feel free to ask on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at WildRoseMage.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for coming in here, Hannah, and hanging out, and for editing issues of Arcadia, for providing us with your writing, and for stuff that we're already working on for future issues of Arcadia. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yay.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey everybody, now I am here with a pre-recorded segment with one of our incredible Arcadia 7 authors. For people who don't know, introduce yourself, tell them who you are and what you wrote for Arcadia.
Yeah, so thank you for having me, James. My name is Sharang Biswas. I am an independent game designer, writer, and interactive artist. I currently teach at NYU's Game Center and Fordham's Department of Computer Science, and I am the game artist in residence currently at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens. And for Arcadia 7, I wrote a chapter about a guild of picklers and fermenters and the various characters, items, and schemes that surround them. And quick note, pickling and fermenting are two different things. And if you read the chapter, you will learn that.
Wow, that's it is one of the things that I have seen people commenting on a lot, that they love this little sidebar we have that explains the difference between pickling and fermenting. And there have been a lot of questions about like, where did this idea come from? People seem to really, really like it, but they're also like, how did you get this idea for this guild that is also has some secret motivations, shall we say, but is also a guild of like foodies who specifically love pickling and fermenting? So just talk to me about where that came from.
Yeah, so for I know some of the people who are watching might know of some of my other work. A lot of my work in games is in relation to food. So like I won an Indicate Award for my game Feast, which is a game that you all play while sharing a meal. I won an IGDN award for Feast and for my game Verger, which is a solo role-playing game that you play in an empty kitchen while making salad and screaming into the ether about witchcraft. I'm making a new game about alchemically building a perfect boyfriend while eating a charcuterie plate and listening to audio with my friend Nick O'Leary. So I've done a lot of food-related game stuff. So when James reached out to me, so when you reached out to me, I don't know who I'm speaking to, you or the audience, when I was reached out to by MCDM, they're like, you want to pitch something for us? And I'm like, well, I like pitching and writing about food. And I also read a lot of, not a lot, I read a decent amount of nonfiction about food. And I had recently finished Michael Pollan's Cooked, which is a brilliant book. There's a Netflix show, but the book is so much more than the show. So the show is lovely, but I would recommend both. They have different things in them. And he has a whole chapter about pickling and fermentation. And Michael Pollan is really interesting because he talks about sociology, anthropology, history, and methods of cooking, right? And he talks about this idea of, so the first chapter is about cooking with fire, and he talks about how cooking on open flame, roasting meat is something that brings people together, while pickling is something that helps differentiate culture, right? So he says like we are the nation that pickles cabbage with spices. We are the people that pickle beans and make natto. We are the people that make sauerkraut and stuff, right? So pickling and fermenting, Pollan contends, has this ethnic building or group mindset sort of idea to it. And he talks about all these things about pickling, like the health and this and that. And so reading this book, I got really interested in that. And so when I was thinking of what to pitch, I'm like, okay, well, let me think. Well, what about food can I do? Because I want to do you saw I did a couple of things. I did one about like,
yes,
I won't spoil it, so I might pitch it again. But I did some other stuff. But the food one, I was like, well, what interests me right now about food? And I was thinking back to this, and I'm like, great, pickling. Let's go with that. And then I'm like, well, this is specifically for Dungeons and Dragons, right? Most Dungeons and Dragons games have an element of heroic fantasy tied to it. Not all, of course, but most Dungeons and Dragons games have that element to the game. And I'm like, well, let me make this Pickling Guild a heroic sort of thing, right? And what is a natural fit? Well, if we're talking about like pickles as like healthy, then what if this is like a public health organization, right? That secretly deals with like disease and things like that. That's a spoiler for players who are watching this. Sorry, but GMs,
that's okay. We're gonna spoil it. We're gonna spoil it, so that's
right,
fine.
Right. And so I was like, great, let's have this secret cult, not really cult, a secret group, secret cabal of like anti-disease folks that not masquerade because they also do it, but that is hidden or funded by this like pickling guild, pickling and fermenting guild. So yeah.
Yeah, it feels very heroic fantasy to have this, and it's multi-level, right? There are people who are sort of casual members, right? What you call annual members in the article. They believe that all the Pickling Guild does is get together, talk about food, have this newsletter, that kind of thing. And they're members. Yeah, it's great. And then as you get
those
deeper,
exist, right? Yeah, because my one of my college friends, Itai, was telling me about like, oh, I'm in this Brooklyn fermenting group, and I personally tried to ferment my own hot sauce and got black mold growing in it, unfortunately. But like these pickling groups exist in real life, so that was one of the like touch points of like the surface level is like, yeah, there are these pickling groups, they exist, great.
I think one of the things about this article that has people talking is that you talk about pickling, you talk about fermenting, and there's a very specific magic item called sepal cheese that you have created that is made in the chest of a zombie. And it essentially, when you eat it, you gain the power to turn undead like a cleric can. It is just a wonderful magic item. The art is incredible. Of
The art's
this piece
lovely.
of art.
Like when I opened the preview and I'm like, oh my god, that's my cheese, and that's an awesome alchemist like brandishing it. Like I love like seeing like, he has a plague doctor mask because he has to like get right into and it's a live zombie, so the zombie is moving, and so he has his plague doctor mask to protect himself when doing this. I love the art for it.
It's so good, and it's so evocative, and it's based on your description, right, of the cheese being made in the chest of this zombie, and the zombie moving around. And so my question for you, and this comes from, I asked before this on Twitter and on our Discord if people had questions for you, a lot of questions about where did the idea for sepal cheese come, and what do you think in the fictional world, in the D&D world, what do you think the origin of that is? Was it discovered by accident? Who first decided, let me crack open a zombie's chest and make some cheese in it?
Yeah. So there's an NPC in the chapter who is a necromancer, a significantly powerful necromancer who is a member of the guild, right? And I really wanted that because this idea of pickling and fermenting and necromancy, clearly go together, right? Because in D&D, necromancy is a lot about like decay and rot and that kind of stuff, right? And pickling is a controlled form of rot in a certain sense, right? And fermenting. So I honestly made the necromancer character first. And I'm like, I really want this cool necromancer, grandparent sort of loving figure who really believes in pickles and necromancy and how the two go together, right? And then with that, I was like, okay, I'd been prepared to write, NPCs, adventure hooks, things like that. And I'm like, wait a minute, if I have a guild of pickling and fermenting, I need to put some interesting food in the chapter. That needs to happen because I felt as a player, often when I write things, I'm like, what would I expect this chapter or this game or whatever to have if I were a player, right? I've also found that when I've run tables, like I was running the playtest for Avatar recently as part of my, writing parts of the game. I didn't write the whole game. And I was doing the playtest and my table got really into like, what food are we eating at this restaurant and what food is the waiter serving us. So I'm like, yeah, like I was thinking, I'm like, food, like specific details about food come up a lot in games because eating is this very social communal act that we all engage with. It's also a way that one can color and discover culture, right? And so in these fantasy worlds, we can color and discover the cultures of these worlds. So I'm like, okay, I must include some food. So I'm like, okay, here's some mundane, and then I want to have some magical, because if it's a magical pickling guild, let some of this food be magical. And so I was thinking, and then I'd written this necromancer. I'm like, okay, again, pickling and necromancy go well together. And then there's this whole thing of like, brie and camembert and stuff are cave aid. They're like, specifically, I think it's true camembert, I may be wrong about this, has to be made in a specific cave in France, right? Because the specific microbiota of the cave will inoculate the milk and turn it into cheese. So I'm like, great. That inspired, necromancy. What if you cure the cheese instead of in a cave inside a inside a mobile undead creature, and the necrotic energies that animate the creature and the I was thinking, and this obviously getting too technical, which I would never I might in the game, but you want to have some mystery. But like the fungi that live on a undead versus a fungus that's inhabiting simply a corpse are probably different. Because they get different things out of the body, right? The one that's undead has necrotic energy flowing through it. So I'm like, great. So it's a long story. All of those probably have an interesting effect on the cheese, both in terms of magic and in terms of flavor. Like this is very uniquely flavored cheese. Like if you eat apple cheese, even if you never venture near undead, it is a cool experience because it has a different flavor and texture. And absolutely, I think some necromancer, possibly this lady, this character, possibly not, was like, I'm into cooking, I'm also into necromancy, I want to experiment, because wizards have hobbies too, right? Especially if we're looking at a late Renaissance kind of world, like what a lot of D&D players play. It's not like specific campaign like Dark Sun and things, but generally D&D is a mashup of medieval and late Renaissance, right? Where people have hobbies and arts are flourishing and things. So yes, what else would a necromancer apply his intellect to? Cooking, and I'm a necromancer. Yes, let me mix these two hobbies together. And so I absolutely think there are all these failed attempts at making horribly poisonous butter and things that like killed someone on contact, but then in some way, like with some special preparation, they came up with this cheese and it gives you the power to turn undead, and it's delicious.
Yeah, in fact, there's a little note you included about eating too much of it doesn't make you any more powerful, but it can make you sick.
Yes,
which is
it makes
great.
the skin look withered and unsightly. So because that's the necrotic energies that are in the cheese, right? Too much and it'll start affecting you. Just like if you eat too much cheese and your cholesterol levels won't be very good.
Right, exactly. And you're not going to have a good time the next day, right? Like you're
Exactly,
going to feel
exactly.
sick if you eat a lot of cheese. I know from experience.
So a lot of undead cheese, that's an extra,
Exactly. Yeah. Another thing that I really liked about this was you described the heraldry for the Pickling Guild, and you did it in like a traditional style.
I spent far too long researching heraldry for this essay, James. The heraldry is the tiniest portion of this piece, but when I started writing, I wrote the one paragraph about, there you go. I wrote the one paragraph about it, and I'm like, okay. And then I was really sparked when you said, Sharang, feel free to send us any notes about art. And I'm like, oh, this guild has to have a blazon. Also, I didn't know the word blazon. I mean, I knew the word blazon, but I didn't know what it specifically means. That's called a blazon,
sure.
right? So I looked up. I started with the Wikipedia article just so I can get the general, and then I looked up the sources it cites to see the language, and I wasn't going to try something complicated because there's a specific grammar of how you describe blazons in heraldic language. So I modeled that after some of the simpler blazons that I saw. So I knew that I would get it at least mostly right, and I wouldn't like make some mistake. And I think it looks cool. So.
Yeah. I mean, it was very cool, and it's funny. I had to reverse engineer because I didn't know what a blazon was right when I got it, and I thought like, am I a bad high fantasy geek that I don't know these things? So it was great to be able to look it up and see like, oh, okay, like this is what all this stuff means, and like I've obviously seen Game of Thrones and read about King Arthur and that kind of thing, right? And it's all there. So it was very cool to include that, and then to see. We like sent it to our testers, right? Our play testers, and the play testers, half of them were like, absolutely know exactly what this is. And the other half were like, I have no clue what we're talking about right now. And I said to them, like, don't worry about it. You're in good hands. I had to look it up too. Like, don't, we're all in this together. But it was fun to see the enthusiasm people had. I think our testers were curious to know, like, how did you find the process of working with them and working with MCDM? Because we, essentially the way it works is you and I go back and forth on the article a little bit. And I do some development with you, and you say, that's a great idea, or nah, that's not a good idea. And we send it to Matt to look at and get his feedback. And then it goes to the testers, and we do 2 rounds with the play testers. And they're looking at a lot of things like balance and math and numbers and stuff like that. So how did you find sort of the whole process from start to finish with the article?
So okay, so normally when I am commissioned to make game work, I am responsible for the testing myself, right? Which is great, obviously, in some sense. And in fact, for something, if I were commissioned to make a whole new game, I would insist that I have to do some playtest myself. I cannot work without. Oh,
absolutely.
Myself. This was not a whole new game, but I actually really like this because I find that playtesting is a lot of man hours, right? And the time for the audience, like, game designers test a lot. Conscientious game designers test a lot, right? And most of that effort is, in some sense, uncompensated, right? Because I might be commissioned by someone, make me a game, and then they pay me per word, right? Which is interesting, which is what it is, but like the time I put into playtesting, I often put like 20 hours into playtesting, right? If I run a full game that's 4 hours long, I may test it like 5 times. That's like 20 hours, right? So what was really nice about this process was that James was like, we are responsible for playtesting. So I did a very minimal thing of like, to like one person, I was like, okay, what do you think? Take a glance at it, because I always like to have someone look at it so that I'm not like completely on my own. And they're like, okay, this looks cool. I'm like, perfect, send it in. And playtest was done for me, which from a labor rights perspective was really good because I felt like MCDM was being very conscientious about how to compensate its creators. And that felt really good, for one. And second, when I playtest, it tends to obviously be people who know me and most likely like me, right? I wouldn't ask someone who hates me to playtest my game, right? And like, I know a lot of fairly significant game designers, right? And as game designers, we all try to be like objective with each other, right? Obviously. But at some level, we all know each other and know each other's work and like each other. So at the other level, like the playtest feedback I got from your team, like they have no idea who I am, right? They don't know me. Maybe they guess it's me or something. They don't know who I am. And so that's really good because it removes a layer of bias. And obviously, similarly, a lot of my friends are in some ways like me as a person. While I don't know James, I don't know you very well, and your playtesters are probably unlike me in many ways, right? So that was a really good example of where you sent me feedback from playtesters where I had named a cult, and I hadn't been very conscientious about thinking of the name for the cult, right? I just wanted it to sound somewhat like disturbing, and you sent me feedback being like, Sharang, this name reads as like sex negative, because I'd named it about like a fallen fetus or something, right? And you're like, and I'm like, oh, that's a really good point. Thank you for that, right? And so those kinds of insights are really useful. So both of like, this is a playtest pool that is so different from what I can ever put together, and B, from like a working with creators and what time and stuff do they have and expectations. I think that was also very, very helpful. So
Yeah, and I remember the note you're talking about because I also, right, that came from one of our testers, actually from one of our lead tester, Spencer Hibnick, who is very great and goes by Pesto Enthusiast online, and actually had some great questions for you. But I too was like, oh yeah, this is great. You know, like it sounds like an evil cult. Sounds good, right? And so that's one
That
reason
sounds
it's
like an
good to
evil
have
cult.
people. Yep. Perfect, right? Like we're good to go. And then, but one great reason to test is to have people who can pick up on those things. And I remember also being able to give someone else your stuff to run, right, without you there. I remember Sean Merwin, who's a very prominent designer who I think
I've worked with him before.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. And he told me the best way to play test is to have someone run it and you sit a table away from them and they don't know that you designed it, and listen to everything they say as they try to run it, and how the players react to stuff, and you will at the end of that feel bad about yourself but also have a lot of good playtest data.
And you will the playtesting is so important, I feel, right? You will always, especially in games where you will be giving someone else the instructions to read on their own, right? James, you and I are not going to be in every person's house being like, this is how you run the guild, right? Like Hakan and Kate of Thorny Games, they made sign and dialect and stuff. They commissioned me for a game last year, and I'm like, okay, this is going to go in a book, and randos are going to read it, right? And so after my first 4 playtests, which I ran, my 5th playtest was Naomi Clark. Take these rules and please test them in front of me with these people, and we're going to be on Zoom, right? And I'd been like, oh yes, this game takes 30 to 50 minutes to play. This is so good. And it's a short game, excellent. I'm watching them play. 3 hours in, they are halfway through the game. And I'm like, hey everyone, I'm going to stop this playtest now, because I hadn't conveyed ways for the group to make the game 1 hour. In my head, when I ran the game, I was like, yeah, right? And so watching and seeing what people do without your presence there is so powerful, and I think important in most kinds of game design.
Yeah, definitely. I could not agree more. And it is really helpful. And I think it's also one of those things that as you design more and more stuff, you're able to take criticism better and less personally. I feel like you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense, because Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a skill that it's a skill like any other. It's a muscle you develop, right? The first time you'll hear criticism and you'll be like, oh no, everyone hates my thing, right? And then after a while you'll be like, no, this is a natural part of it. Same time when you first get a short story edited, right? The editor will be like, ugh, and you'll be like, no, but you'll learn to be like, no, this is for the good of the project, right? And they are not being mean-spirited, they are being honest.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And that's what you want, because it does make your game better. And I also know that, like, when I first started designing things, I thought like, well, I'll put this out and it'll be pretty much done. And now I know that, like, well, I'll put this out and then we'll keep working on it is more how game design often goes.
Right. And this is true both for the analog world, and obviously we know this in the video game world, right? Patches and patches and patches and patches, right?
Yes, yeah, that's very true, right? The way everything is made makes a lot of sense. So I wanted to ask you some of the questions that we had from people on Twitter and on Discord. One big question we got a lot was, have you ever done any pickling or fermenting on your own?
So I love eating pickles. Over COVID, over last year, over 2020, I did a lot of new food experiments, right? Because I'm like, I roasted more birds in 2020 than I have roasted in my life, for example. And one of the things I did was I tried fermenting my own hot sauce, and I must have done something wrong because it grew black mold, and I was going to give it as a gift to someone, and I'm like, no, I ended up buying them chocolate instead. So I will be doing more. This time I've decided I'm going to try it in winter. It might take longer, but hopefully that will reduce the chances of black mold from growing. But I do want to ferment my own hot sauce. I know I have friends who do a lot of like beer making. I'm not a big beer person, so I do not do that. But I'm going to start with this hot sauce, and if it goes well, I'll do something else. Of course, I've done like quick pickle stuff, right? Like put some cucumbers in some vinegar for the dish that I'm cooking. That doesn't count in my book. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. If you want it to count, it can count. For me, it does not count for me. I'm not going to dismiss your culinary efforts to the audience. It's still a project.
Are you like an accomplished cook? Do you cook a lot?
I'm a fairly practiced cook. Whether or not I'm accomplished is a thing that you must judge after eating my food, but I'm a fairly practiced cook at this stage. Yes, I started cooking when I had to, when I was in Germany on a foreign study program. I'm like, we got one meal every day from the campus, and we had to cook a lot. I'm like, well, I'm also in Germany. I'm going to just buy lots of different kinds of meat and try and cook them. And I was in a military academy that summer, and so our floor lieutenant, the like highest ranking floor mate of mine, I was not obviously in the German military, as you can imagine, but our floor lieutenant taught me like basic stuff. And then I was in a cooking fraternity in my college, so I went back. I'm like, bitches, I'm gonna cook now. And they're like, you should have asked us ages ago. We all cook. And I'm like, well, I'm an engineer. Don't hold it against me. I'm too busy. And yeah, so I'm a fairly practiced cook at this stage. I bake sweet things a lot less, but I do a lot of cooking.
That's awesome. That's really great. You know, you talked about your game that uses a charcuterie plate, and one thing that I think, because many people get into the hobby of role-playing games through D&D, when they sit down to maybe design a new RPG, they think like, what dice am I going to use, right? And I've played a lot of games that use different randomizers or tools to play the game that aren't dice, right? Dread is a very famous example that uses the Jenga tower to build tension in a horror game. Yeah. You have done a couple of different things, right, with different mechanics that don't use dice and stuff. How is it that you get inspired to use something? Do you start with like, what can I make out of this cheese plate? Or are you thinking about a game that you want, you know, like the sorts of stories you want to tell, the sorts of things you want people to feel during the game, and then you discover what is the right sort of randomizer and mechanic to use? Yeah.
So this is interesting because I don't work the same way with every piece that I make, right? First off, not even relevant that I make pieces in many different media, right? Like I write fiction, I write interactive fiction, I make analog games, I make board games, I've worked with video games even, right? I make interactive theater. So obviously processes for different things are different. But even aside from this medium divide, pieces come differently to me, right? So my first game about food that I made was Feast. I was aiming to write a game for the 200-word role-playing game contest. And I said, well, what do I want to make a game about? I'm like, well, let me start with the 200 thing. Let me start with something I like. What two things do I like a lot at this stage in my life? This was like, 2016 or 17, I forget. And I'm like, okay, I like food and I like sex a lot. These are two things that stand out to me. Well, let me pick food because I have to pick one of them, right? I don't have to pick one. I could have made a double game, but at that point, I'm like, let me pick one of them, right? And then I, recently made a lot of work about sex, but we can talk about that later.
That's right.
So I took food, and I'm like, okay. And I don't want to use the word scholarly because I don't consider myself a scholar, but I think about when I make games, different from when I write fiction. When I make games, I engage with theory and stuff a lot, right? So I was like, okay, well, I want to make a game that uses eating as a game mechanic, because if I make a game about food, I want to make it more deeply about food than just as a thematic tie-in, right? And so that game, Feast, is a game where you have to make 5 dishes, 1 for each taste: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami. And then your players, you come together and you are alien parasites eating the minds of people you are infecting. And as you eat a piece of food in real life, that mimics the parasite consuming a memory and thought and emotion, right? And the sensations you get from the food you're eating, which is the aroma, the taste, the flavor, and the mouthfeel, are akin to what the parasite's feeling. And then you use that to then describe, in a sense, regurgitate the memory, the story that you have just consumed, right? And so there, I was very much like, if I want to make a game about the act of eating, what fictional analog maps onto the physical act of eating, right? And I think of that a lot, right? Because I think of games as a set of meaningful procedures, right? Where while you could watch a movie or read a book, which of course are their own procedure, but you do like the same procedure throughout. Games are sets of procedures that carry meaning, right? The act of rolling this die means something. The act of hitting this ball very hard and very fast means something. The act of toppling this Jenga tower means something. The act carries meaning, right? And I find the best way to do that is to have a close correlation, at least in some symbolic sense, of the act the player is performing and the act that you are imagining, right? And so in that sense, I made these. So I made Feast about eating. I made Verdure about cooking, which is about like, what does it mean to make food, right? To prepare a meal. And people talk about like the secret ingredient is love, right? Like, yeah, this food is made with love. And I'm like, well, what if the secret ingredient is spite? Right? What if I'm putting spite into this dish, right? I'm a witch and I'm cursing someone. The act of cooking, I'm going to fill it with spite and a curse, right? And it was also in my head an analog to like potion making, right? For practical reasons, the game wasn't about making soup. The game was about making salad for a number of reasons. One, in that different soups have different amount of time they need to cook. Also, it's very long. Making a salad is fairly straightforward and easy, right? And so in Verdure, which is the game that makes you make a salad, again, I was like, okay, and the prompts of the game are very mapped to the physical act you're doing. So when you are chopping the vegetables, that has a very specific prompt. When you are tearing the leaves off the herbs, very specific prompt. When you are pouring the oil, specific prompt. And then similarly, this game about eating the charcuterie plate, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but I'm working with Nicole Leary and a couple of other artists. We're applying for some grants for it. In fact, we're hoping to make it a bigger project. Is about alchemically building the perfect boyfriend. And so all of these, I often think about, well, what verb interests me, or what verb fictional mapping interests me, right? So like, I'm a big fan of the aesthetic of witchcraft and potions and alchemy and things. So yes, can I make something that works with that? But that isn't always the way I design games, right? So the other James D'Amato, when he commissioned me to write for the micro RPG anthology, I worked the opposite way. I said, okay, game name is going to be Absolution in Brass, a game of guilty cyborg steampunk zombies, something along those lines. That's the final name of the game, but I had some idea about that initially. I'm like, I'm going to make a zombie cyborg game. Bam! So there, I started with the theme first, and then came up with the procedures. The procedures are all about asking for forgiveness. So it depends on the project, but I often map procedure to game. Now that, of course, is when I'm making a unique game, right? This project for Arcadia, I'm not making a game system. I was making something that sits on an existing system. And so the process was different. Like I said, it was more about like, what inspires me? Great, what can I do? For my next pitch, for example, I have I am actually going to pitch a new like rule thing, right? And so also a different process there. So, but you'll see that when I send you my pitch.
I'm very excited to check it out. This is about all the time we have, but before we go, Sharang, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm very active on Twitter at Sharang Biswas, which is the spelling you see on the screen right now, without the space, obviously. That should link to my website, which also links to my itch page, but my itch.io page, where you can get some, not all the games I've made, is astrolingus.itch.io. Think star tongue. Astrolingus.itch.io. You'll find Feast and Verdure, the ones I mentioned. You'll also, big plug, because it is currently in the running for an IGDN Indie Groundbreaker Award. Check out Honey and Hot Wax, an anthology of erotic art games published by Pelgrane Press. They're the folks who do like Night's Black Agents and like 13th Age and stuff. It was nominated for an Indicator Award last year, but is currently in the running for an IGDN Award for Game of the Year. So check that out if that interests you. You don't vote, unfortunately. There's a jury, but do check it out. So, yeah.
That's very, very cool. So, well, thank you so much for coming and joining me today, and thank you for your contributions to Arcadia. You knocked it out of the park.
Thank you for having me today, and thank you for agreeing to work with my rather wild and acidic idea.
That's exactly what we want.